Welcome to the Com Analytics channel. I'm Boris Tizengausen. Today is September 23rd and we have a packed episode ahead. In this episode, Russia has warned about the occupation of Moldova and NATO troops are landing in Odessa. And once again, Putin is brandishing nuclear weapons. Is the situation really that dire? Meanwhile, Russia has admitted that the front has reached a stalemate. And today's meeting between Zelensky and Trump, what should Ukraine expect? Poland has finally decided to shoot down Russian planes, while at the same time drones are paralyzing Denmark and Norway. And there are a lot of strange inconsistencies with these drones. We'll talk about this and more in today's episode. There's going to be a lot of interesting stuff. So if this is your first time on this channel, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episodes. So the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation reports on its website that Europe is preparing an occupation. NATO paratroopers will be sent to Odessa from Moldova to intimidate the unrecognized Transnistria. That is, this is on the official website of the Foreign Intelligence Service of the Russian Federation, which is headed by Naryshkin. And here's what they write there, that the European Union is ready to send troops into Moldova and occupy it in order to maintain its Russophobic policy. To intimidate the unrecognized, NATO paratroopers will be stationed right in the Odessa region to somehow intimidate this unrecognized Transnistria from across the border. Why deploy NATO paratroopers in the Odessa region, where missiles and drones are flying in, is still not entirely clear to me. But apparently, someone brought something pretty strong to the head of the Foreign Intelligence Service, Naryshkin. Well, the NATO paratroopers are already in Odessa, so beware unrecognized Transnistria. It's like those scary stories from childhood, you know. Girl, girl, the little coffin on wheels is already in your city. Girl, girl, it's already on your street. So Naryshkin is trying to tell the whole world something with these strange threats. Let me remind you that all of this is happening against the backdrop of absolutely unprecedented attempts by Russia to influence the elections in Moldova. Let me remind you, these elections will take place on September 28th, and in these elections Moldova will finally choose its path. The Kremlin understands this perfectly and is literally pouring money in, buying up everyone they can. They use all sorts of schemes, from launching separate apps, including on the Telegram platform, to distributing Russian bank cards, bringing in cash. A total campaign of disinformation. In previous episodes, I explained to you in detail how it works there. In short, Russia is throwing enormous resources at trying to influence these elections. And of course, there are also paid protests. Basically, they plan to seriously destabilize Moldova. And already a year ago, the Russian Foreign Ministry reported that it was Ukraine that was pushing for forceful scenarios to resolve the issue of the unrecognized territory, Transnistria, and this complicates the search for ways to resolve the situation. And do you remember, after the full-scale invasion, Russian military officials were saying that they would soon cut Ukraine off from the sea? They even published maps, and Putin was saying that the entire Black Sea region belonged to Russia. That's it. They would cut Ukraine off from the sea, build a land corridor to Moldova, and head straight there. And tell me, please, why? Well, after Moldova, they were planning to go even further. So why did they need a land corridor to Moldova? What do you think? Was it to give Maya Sandu a bouquet of flowers? Of course not, it was to seize territory and keep going. But in reality, Ukraine has nullified that scenario. And now look at how things have turned out. At the very beginning it was, oh, what's there to fight with Ukraine about? We'll just raise an eyebrow and that'll be enough. We'll deal with them right away. But now, it turns out Ukraine is foiling the devious plan to seize the unrecognized Transnistria, and Ukraine is making life impossible for Russian PMCs on the African continent. And in Syria, remember when Assad was being kicked out of Syria, Ukrainian drone operators were spotted there, so it turns out Ukraine is practically all-powerful. But seriously, if Moldova doesn't resolve the issue with the unrecognized Transnistria now, then Russia will resolve it after the war with Ukraine. I'm sure of that. 200%. And about yesterday's very, very important statement, yesterday Peskov, that mustachioed busybody, comes out and announces that Putin is about to make an extremely important statement, so everyone should wait for it by lunchtime. Then the moth crawled out of the closet, and she started threatening everyone again with nuclear weapons. I'm quoting Putin's statement from yesterday. By the way, there's a very interesting point there right now. We'll get to that in a moment. Russia is ready to respond to any strategic threats, and not just with words, but with military technical measures, Putin stated. And as a result of the West's destructive actions, the foundations for dialogue between nuclear-armed states have been undermined. The situation in the area of strategic stability continues to deteriorate. Russia has repeatedly warned the West, but its initiatives have not received a clear response. So the situation continues to deteriorate. It's not the situation in the field of strategic stability that's continuing to deteriorate, but Medvedev, who, from early in the morning, is already drinking heavily and making threats from the children's police room, threatening European officials with violence, and Putin, who threatens the whole world with nuclear weapons. In Putin's version, it turns out it was the West that took some kind of destructive steps. It turns out it was the West that started the war in Ukraine. Let me remind you that it was precisely the war unleashed by Putin that pushed both Finland and Sweden to join NATO, despite the fact that for decades before that, they had maintained a neutral status. I would also remind you that the war in Ukraine triggered that very arms race and record defense budgets in European countries, which previously would have been unimaginable. But of course, for Putin, it's always the West's fault, or Obama, or the Anglo-Saxons, and now even the Ukro-Saxons. But this statement is very telling, and it serves as an indicator that Putin has run out of other arguments. When things are going badly for him, he keeps bringing up these nuclear threats again and again. Apparently, in his view, they're the only thing that works effectively on the West. Putin's expectations that the front would collapse and that the Russians would go on the offensive in the summer or fall did not come true. So these threats are directly connected to the major problems on the front lines. When there's nothing to boast about on the front, that's it. Let's bring up the nuclear card again, let's threaten the West, which is supposedly so unafraid, not shooting down Russian drones, not shooting down Russian planes. Another clever move, according to Putin's strategists, is that with these messages, Putin supposedly raises things to the level of nuclear rhetoric and tells Washington, well, let's establish some kind of dialogue. In other words, Putin is trying to present himself as equal in influence to Donald Trump, as if Russia and the US, like the big grown-up players, will sit down and sort everything out right now. He even says this directly, that the right steps will help establish contact with Washington. But speaking of being equals, I just want to remind you that Russia's entire GDP is less than that of the state of Texas in the US. And the fact that Putin inherited nuclear weapons from the Soviet Union is not his achievement at all. So not only that, Russia also received part of its nuclear weapons from Ukraine in exchange for security guarantees. Well, we can all clearly see now what those security guarantees are worth. By the way, the very same nuclear triad aviation that Putin uses to launch missile strikes on Ukraine was also partially transferred to Russia from Ukraine in exchange for security guarantees. So these are Putin's guarantees, and these are Russia's guarantees. About the fact that Putin's offensive has failed, and there's no reason to expect a breakthrough anytime soon. His officials are now openly saying it. Russian senator and commander of Russian Federation Army units Dmitry Rogozin has stated that the front is at a stalemate. So now it's official representatives saying this directly. He believes that the Ukrainian and Russian armies have reached parity in forces and resources, making any advance virtually impossible. So what about all those stories Putin tells Trump that they're about to launch an offensive, the front will collapse and the Ukrainians will flee? How does that make sense? And this is despite the fact that Rogozin, who talks about a stalemate at the front, has his own personal reason to hate Ukraine. Let me remind you, he got a piece of shrapnel from a Ukrainian shell in his backside, and he couldn't sit for a long time. So, in short, by the way, let me just remind you that Rogozin is also a typical Nazi. Just so we're clear, he's a textbook example of a Russian patriotic official, if you will. In 2005, as the head of the Rodina party, he made a campaign video. He and another associate of his, a retired major general, are walking through the streets of Moscow. That's the plot of the video. They see these caricatured Caucasians with big beards behaving strangely and littering. Rogozin approaches them, and one of them, either Rogozin or his associate, asks them a question. Do you even understand Russian? And in the next shot, the Caucasians are gone, and there's a caption, "Let's clean Moscow of trash." I mean, I don't know how else you could interpret that. By the way, I wonder if the Kadyrovites have seen this video. I think they'd find it interesting to watch. So, from time to time, Rogozin also goes off he starts making posts about God. God is with us, we are Russians, truth is on our side, some music, churches, bells. This is the image of such a Christian Russian patriot. How they managed to squeeze war, God, and even kiss Putin's rubber casket all into one sentence, I have no idea. It's a mystery to me, but they can do it. They have that skill. In short, a typical Russian patriot, a Nazi, a believer, an official who says, "For Rus, I'll crap myself," pardon my French. So here sits Rogozin with a straight face saying that everyone has reached a stalemate, the forces are equal, and no one can advance. Could it be that Putin has lied to everyone again about this offensive? Can you imagine Donald Trump? Never happened before, and here we go again, right? Well, Rogozin isn't quite right about the parity of the Ukrainian armed forces. Ukraine's defense forces continue their counteroffensive actions in the Dobropilya direction. And assault units there have advanced up to 2.5 kilometers depending on the sector. And during this operation, 164 square kilometers have already been liberated. 7 settlements have been reclaimed, the occupiers have been driven out from there, and 9 enemy sabotage and reconnaissance groups have been cleared out. So it's not all as it seems. It's not as balanced as Rogozin says. And by the way, friends, about the fundraiser, an important one. First of all, huge thanks to everyone who helped yesterday to close the fundraiser for Kesha Vladislav with the call sign Kesha, which we organized to get a vehicle for his unit. Not only did we raise a bit more, but there will also be enough for a set of tires and fuel. I wrote to him this morning and he's just on fire. He's shocked at how it happened because their fundraiser had been stalled for a long time. So a huge thank you to all of you from him. I told him that a lot of kind and warm words were written in the comments. He promised to come and read them when he has time. So thank you from Kesha and his unit, and thank you from me as well. And as for them, we are just endlessly grateful. Let me remind you, at 18 he went to defend Ukraine, was seriously wounded, returned to duty, and is still fighting now. In short, Ukraine stands on the shoulders of people like him. And today we are starting a fundraiser for the legendary 3rd Assault Brigade. The commanders from the 3rd Assault Brigade have recorded a message for us. Please take a look.
Greetings, friends. My call sign is Talbot. I am the commander of the Revenge Crew of the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade, FPV Strike Company. I'm reaching out to the viewers of Boris Tizengausen's channel with a request to help raise funds for Matrice 30 daytime drones.
These are large copters. We need them for reconnaissance. And they also perform some other very interesting functions. The fundraising amount is significant, 1,100,000 hryvnias. We are counting on your support, on your help. Thanks to them, we will be able to destroy the enemy even more effectively and bring Ukraine's victory closer.
Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Well, you can be sure those drones will end up in skilled hands. The aces in the 3rd Assault Brigade are so good, the occupiers from the swamps are in for a real disappointment. As they say, better hide in the wheat fields. Believe me, the 3rd Assault Brigade will run right over them, leaving nothing but bast shoes and birch bark behind. So let's support our defenders from the legendary 3rd Assault Brigade. So today at the 80th anniversary session of the UN General Assembly, there will be a meeting between Volodymyr Zelensky and Donald Trump. They'll be discussing how to move the negotiation process forward. This is despite the fact that Trump has no intention of imposing sanctions against Russia and seems to have forgotten about them altogether. He doesn't even mention them, despite all the ultimatums he once gave to Putin. Another important point is that every conversation with Trump needs to be approached not as a discussion with someone you can just present arguments to and convince. A narcissistic personality type is a completely different story. So if you were to start telling him that Vladimir Putin has deliberately deceived him, you will most likely just make him incredibly angry. Now, because no one can deceive the supremely great. He can trick everyone, but no one can deceive him. Even if he was deceived, it was all part of his plan. Do you see what I mean? These are the peculiarities of dealing with a narcissistic personality type, and that only he can be tough with Putin, not some Biden or Obama. So only Trump can be tough. And another thing about Trump, I've noticed that, like probably any narcissist, he simply cannot tolerate even the attempt to manipulate him. He really dislikes it when people start showing him photos of destroyed houses, photos of war victims. He feels that this is a way of trying to use him. As strange as it may sound, to us it might really seem, how is that possible? I mean, just look, these are families, entire homes, whole cities destroyed. He thinks that when he's shown these photos, it's to play on his sympathy and force him to make some decision. In other words, instead of convincing him with logic by appealing to his interests or his image. He is very sensitive to anything that enhances his image as the strongest leader and the toughest negotiator. So if you offer a solution that allows him to look like a winner, he's actually willing to consider it, even if it's a difficult solution. And yes, you can't tell him that Putin deceived him. There's a different approach there. That is, you can show the world that you, Donald Trump, managed to do what Obama and Biden could not. It's about highlighting some unique superpower of his. Well, it's clear that Trump sees any negotiation as a deal. So you know what? You will get this specific thing if you help Ukraine or if you put pressure on Putin. And the contrast with his rivals is just obvious. That's probably what we need to focus on right now. And here, it's very important to plant in his mind the excellent idea of Putin's inferiority to Trump. Where is Donald Trump and where is Putin, right? It's laughable when some vassal of China from the swamps tries to dictate terms to Donald Trump himself. Well, of course, stroking the ego is a classic move for narcissists. And how many wars has Putin stopped? And how many has Trump? Exactly. Putin also, I think this would be a killer argument for Donald Trump, that it's actually Putin who doesn't want Donald Trump to win the Nobel Peace Prize. Now that would be, yes, unexpected. He just doesn't want to end the war. Otherwise, Trump would get that prize right away. Not like Obama, who got it undeservedly and in advance. Though that's true, he got it in advance. But Trump could have, and Putin doesn't want that. What a scumbag, right, Putin? So that 1.5-meter scumbag needs to be punished. Well, if someone also secretly tells Donald Trump that Volodymyr Zelensky carries a small golden bust of Donald Trump in his breast pocket for good luck right next to his heart, that would just blow everything up. And I'm saying all this now, and it's not a joke. I understand that this is the reality we live in, and all of this might actually work. Not arguments about how many people Putin has killed, how many cities he has burned, and so on. But this might, I hope our delegation has some decent profilers, and that they'll prepare the main talking points and key messages in the right way. At the very least, I'm closely following the work of Ukraine's new ambassador to the US, Olha Stefanishina, whom I know personally. Well, I see that they've started to emphasize the right points. The main thing is that they don't burn out. By the way, friends, don't forget to subscribe to this channel. If you feel like the world has gone crazy, you're not imagining it. Subscribe. Welcome to our Chamber of Common Sense. There are already 452,000 of us here. If we ever need to quickly build an ark of sanity, here we are. All of us know who needs to be saved. Everyone who's subscribed is sane, so subscribe. Russia is calling on the International Civil Aviation Organization to ease sanctions on the supply of aircraft parts to the country, according to Reuters. Do you know why I'll always cover these stories about import substitution? Sanctions don't scare us, but actually give us aircraft parts because this Kremlin liar, it's just completely dishonest. This Botox jellyfish, she lies all the time. And sometimes, when he lies a lot, he makes these surprised eyes like, I don't even know how to describe it. And I'm like, let me quickly tell you how sanctions are making Russia stronger. So Moscow insists that access to aircraft parts is crucial for the safety of civil aviation flights. But the sanctions contradict international rules. Doesn't war by any chance contradict international rules? Putin himself said that sanctions only make Russia stronger. So you all should be in your prime right now, really. And in Russia, they claim that restrictions on aircraft parts deliveries critically affect safety. And that parts for more than 700 planes, mostly Airbuses, had to be delivered through complicated indirect routes. I wonder who was helping them with that. How surprising. In today's world, where you can basically track which part is made for which plane at the Boeing or Airbus factory, it suddenly turns out that Russia is buying parts for 700 planes through roundabout ways. Let me remind you, these aren't made in every country. They're only produced at specific factories that can track where these parts are going. So how does that even happen? Well, we're about to find out how it happens. By the way, speaking of import substitution, the Russian MS-21 aircraft, which was supposed to replace all these Boeings and Airbuses, was supposed to go into mass production, and Russians were supposed to be flying on it already. That didn't quite work out. Let me remind you of the timeline. I wrote it down on purpose. Here you go. This is when they wanted to launch the MS-21. So 2009. They said mass production would start in 2016. In 2012, they said the first flight would already be in 2015. And then in 2017, at a press conference, they said, well, we're pushing it back to 2020, 2020. In 2019, they pushed it back to 2021. In 2022, they pushed it back to 2024. In 2023, they're pushing it back, most likely, to 2025 or 2026. The latest statement on all this, serial production will begin in 2026, but that's not certain. So it's been 10 years since the serial production of this aircraft was supposed to start, but it still hasn't started. But at the same time, they're asking for sanctions to be lifted so they can buy spare parts. By the way, how do Russians manage this, and who is helping them? Well, I mean, obviously companies from foreign jurisdictions friendly to Russia can purchase these spare parts themselves and then resell them to Russians. But, and right here, with Belavia, the kind White House is lifting sanctions from Lukashenko. And experts say that Russia could take advantage of these lifted sanctions. And now we need to keep an even closer eye on that mustachioed chip Lukashenko. I mean, we remember how he took advantage of the sanctions imposed on Russia, repackaging Western goods. And remember, Belarusian shrimp, Belarusian mussels, Belarusian jamon, all of that happened. Now he is going to acquire spare parts for Belavia and then effortlessly supply them to Russia. And what I truly do not comprehend is precisely why, with any authoritarian dictator, Donald Trump now consistently chooses the diplomatic carrot approach. With Lukashenko, for example, not the stick, he could have really come down hard on him, but instead he gives him gold-plated cufflinks, he lifts sanctions from Belavia, he does this for him, he does that for him. And now Poland is acting up, for contrast. While some are lifting sanctions, others are closing the border with Belarus. The Polish foreign minister warned Russia that any of its objects entering NATO airspace will be shot down. If another missile or any other object enters our airspace, whether intentionally or by accident, and is shot down, and the debris falls on NATO territory, don't come here to complain. You've been warned, said Mr. Sikorsky at the UN Security Council. Well, look, in words everything is correct, everything is right. In words you're like Leo Tolstoy, but in practice there are always nuances. I'm genuinely happy for our ally Poland that they've found such determination regarding aerial targets coming from the Russian Federation. At least they've already taken some important actions. Well, maybe not in the sky, but on the ground. I'm talking specifically about that very closed Belarusian border. Yesterday, a whole delegation from China arrived to see Lukashenko. And let me remind you before that, China's foreign minister Wang Yi arrived in Poland and talked for 3 hours. But they still didn't open the border through Belarus for transit cargo. So yesterday, the Chinese delegation flew in to see Lukashenko, and judging by everything, they really gave him a good talking to this time. Well, now he'll definitely have to release a few political prisoners so that Poland will soften its stance. But the halt of Chinese transit through Belarus is also a lever of influence for China over Russia regarding the Russia-Ukraine war. That's why we need to work very closely with Poland here. Moreover, 7 countries already, including Poland, are ready to join us in building this wall against Russian drones. Well, basically, these are all the neighbors of the Russian Federation, and I think Romania is in there too. So, while Russia is being threatened and told, well, if something flies in here now, we'll turn your place into an international airport in Denmark. It was closed due to reports of drones. They kept flying around there. It was shut down after these unidentified UAVs appeared in the sky, and in Norway there was an alert because of drones over military territory. So they detained 2 Singaporean citizens in Norway. I don't know what was flying there. Do you know why I don't know? Because in Denmark, and this is a quote from the Copenhagen police, in Denmark the drones disappeared on their own and were not shot down, according to the Copenhagen police. As for whether the drone is connected to Russia, They refuse to comment. As of now, the airports there are open. How is that possible? Well, explain to me, what kind of war was NATO preparing for if they have drones flying over military facilities, over military bases, if drones are flying over airfields and they can't shoot them down? At the very least, just shoot it down and see what it is. A quadcopter? I don't know, some kind of reconnaissance wing or something else. Just hire one specialist in Ukraine for each drone, they'll quickly tell you how to land these drones. How can you not shoot it down? How do they just keep flying around? You guys must have some kind of lasers over there already. I don't know, maybe you even have nano bees. How can you not shoot down the drones? Or do you just not want to? You know, what if you shoot it down and see that it's a Russian drone? Oh, then you'd actually have to do something. Then you'd have to react somehow. But what if it just flies away? Well, oops. Close your eyes, just like that. The boogeyman is gone. That's it. Maybe that's the whole point. I just don't understand how you can't shoot down these drones. It's just unbelievable. Yeah, Ukraine will tell you all about it. Soon everyone will be lining up to go to Ukraine. Please tell us how to shoot down drones, how to organize mobile groups, how to do this, how to do that, how to do everything. Because it seems like all our lasers and nanobees turned out to be useless. That's probably how it's going to be. And you, please, give Ukraine long-range weapons. Ukraine will make it so that not a single drone will reach you, because there won't be any drone factories left in Russia, nor any people to assemble those drones, since you can't put a drone together without hands. Well, friends, take care of yourselves, take care of your loved ones, and subscribe to this channel. Let's support our legendary 3rd Assault Brigade, so they can show those swamp dwellers what's what. Well, to be precise, they won't hear anything if the 3rd Assault Brigade arrives. Wishing us all a peaceful day and glory to Ukraine.